All right, good evening. My name is David Wick, and I am a district technician here at the Sherburne Soil and Water Conservation District. So tonight we are going to be talking about invasive species and the best approaches to get rid of them or, at least keep them under control. So first off, it will switch. There we go. What is an invasive species? So the state of Minnesota defines an invasive species as any non-native species that causes or may cause economic, environmental harm or harm to human health, or any non-native species that threatens or may threaten natural resources or the use of natural resources. So it's a lot of words, but it basically means if it causes harm, it's an issue, it's an invasive species, and we're going to do something about it. So this includes plants, animals, insects, fish, etc. But tonight we're going to focus on terrestrial plants. So if you're interested in aquatic invasive species, Dan here at the SWCD, he's our expert. I have his contact information at the end, and you can direct all your AIS questions towards him. You can direct your terrestrial questions towards me. So to start off the night, I figured buckthorn would be a great one to start with. So there's actually two types of buckthorn in Minnesota. So we have the common buckthorn and glossy buckthorn. The majority of what we see here in Sherburne County is actually common buckthorn. So when I'm talking about buckthorn, that's what I'm referring to. That's going to be our focus tonight. But buckthorn, it typically is found in wooded areas and on prairie edges. Typically doesn't like full sun, but it absolutely can tolerate it. It absolutely will grow in it. So for that reason, we can kind of find buckthorn all over the place. The reason buckthorn is so harmful to the ecosystem is because that it eliminates plant diversity over time. It does this through its ability to outcompete the native vegetation for sunlight, resources, and just everything a plant needs to grow. And it's able to do this because of how long of a growing season it has. One of the last species to lose its leaves in the fall and one of the first to get them in the spring. And because it's one of the last to lose them in the fall, it actually makes it very easy for landowners to identify it and find it and then control it. So it's a bit of a catch-22. The longer time that it's holding on to these leaves makes it better at being invasive on the landscape. However, it also makes it easier for us to find it and can control it and do something about it. So it has a very high rate of seed production, and these seeds are able to survive in the soil for 5+ years. So even if you have everything removed, you still may see sprouts 5-7 years into the future, because these seeds are finally able to germinate. They're getting the resources, the light, the whatnot that it's going to take for them to finally start growing. So buckthorn management isn't done for at least 5 years, and even after 5 years, if you have everything removed, it still takes constant monitoring, because these berries act as laxatives for birds. So your property can look perfect, your neighbor's property can look perfect, all the properties around you can have perfectly no buckthorn, but all it takes is one bird to fly in and drop some more seeds off, and you're back to managing buckthorn. So because buckthorn management is something you're going to be dealing with for the rest of the time that you own this property, it's important don't burn yourself out the first year trying to 100% eradicate it. Don't burn yourself out the second year trying to do the same. If you have a lot of acreage, one of the best steps that you can take is to remove the female trees, because they have male and female trees. Only half of the trees will produce those berries. So typically in that first year that you're working on your buckthorn removal, remove the female trees, remove the trees that have berries. They look identical. So how do you know female versus male? You're looking for the berries. And when you cut those trees down, berries are going to fall off. They're going to get spread all around. One step to kind of prevent the berries from going everywhere is to cut your tree and have it fall onto a tarp, and then kind of fold the tarp up as best you can. It's still not perfect, so just assume you're going to have it. You're going to miss some berries, you're going to have some sprouts, and that's part of the game. It's unfortunate, but it's just something we have to keep working around. So moving on, when you're done removing your female trees and you decide it's time to start, conducting your buckthorn removal treatments, the best time to do this is in the fall. So not only, do buckthorn hold their leaves longer, um, so they're easy to identify because they're holding their leaves longer, because it's the fall, all plants are drawing down, their nutrients and their sugars and whatnot from their leaves into their roots. So instead of in the spring, they're pushing everything from their roots into their leaves. During the fall, they're drawing everything down. So it's a great time to apply herbicide. And this isn't, just pall mall going out spraying things. What this looks like is a cut stump treatment. So what you're going to do is, cut the buckthorn at the base and then follow through with, some kind of mixture of Roundup, some kind of killer, and you're going to apply that just to the stump of the tree. You don't need to spray the bases, spray the sides. A paintbrush or a dauber works really well to just get that trunk of the tree so that you're not getting Roundup everywhere. You're not spreading these harmful chemicals and killing non-targeted species. So you're also not only are you protecting the environment, you're protecting yourself by using as little as possible. So that is the best management. Cut the tree at the stump, put some Roundup on there, and then carry on to the next one and the next one and the next one. And as you can see in the picture, the stump is blue. So adding some sort of dye to your Roundup or whatever herbicide you're planning on using is a great idea so that you actually know where you've applied that herbicide. So again, you're not using extra, you're not, just spreading it all across the landscape, keeping it contained. It's very targeted, so there's no damage to anything other than the buckthorn. And you're just doing everything in your power to protect the environment and yourself. So if you're not interested in using any sort of herbicide, one option is after you cut that stump is you can cover it with, a black plastic bag. They make products specifically for buckthorn. They're called buckthorn baggies or, something similar. That's, the trademark name. But essentially what you're trying to do is prevent any sort of sunlight reaching the soil surface where the buckthorn would be able to sprout. And you're going to have to leave those bags on there, for a year, at least a year, to prevent any sort of further sprouting. So personally, I'm not as big of a fan of the buckthorn baggies because I've just seen the trees grow right around the bag. However, if you go to the websites of these products, they obviously will show you how effective they are. So that's kind of up to your discretion and how you want to manage your own property. So moving along, we'll start on Siberian elm. So Siberian elm is typically found in open prairies. I kind of think of it as the buckthorn of the prairies. It's a very similar plant. It takes over just like buckthorn does in the woods, and it totally will take over a prairie in a similar way. So we can easily distinguish Siberian elm from our native American elm by looking just at the leaf sizes. So Siberian elm leaves are typically much smaller, being 1 to 2 inches in size, whereas American elm leaves are much larger at 3 to 6 inches long, 2 to 3 inches wide. So it's quite a bit different in size. However, American elm and Siberian elm can cross-pollinate, which then can create some confusion. So there's a bit of a caveat, but the majority of the time when you're looking at Siberian elm, it's going to be pretty distinct whether it's Siberian elm or whether it's an American elm. So because part of what makes Siberian elm so invasive is that it has this extremely high seed germination rate, and the seedlings can establish very quickly, which allows it to thus spread very quickly. And that's part of why people like them, because they grow so quickly that you get a full-grown tree in a few years versus a lot longer of a time with some of the native trees here in Minnesota. But mostly in Sherburne County, I see Siberian elm invading prairies and pastures. Those are kind of the main places and just any sort of uncultivated, land with a lot of sunlight. So Siberian elm management is actually very similar to buckthorn management. The most effective way of getting rid of Siberian elm is again to pull, hand pull small seedlings, and then anything that you can't pull is to do that same stump cut treatment. Um, so again, like buckthorn, you're cutting it at the stump, putting a little herbicide on, and then moving on to the next tree. And again, like buckthorn, the most effective time to do this is during the fall. And, because Siberian elm is a prairie species, sometimes prescribed burns are part of your prairie's, work plan. And fire is able to control small diameter Siberian elm. So Siberian elm that's, 1 to 2 inches in diameter, fire will kill it and hopefully remove it from the landscape. Also, if you have larger, Siberian elms and you don't want to use herbicide, you're going to use a fire in the future. If you cut the large tree down, it will, stump sprout, and you're going to have a lot smaller, 12 to 24-inch, sprouts, and that fire can come through and then kill those small sprouts versus it would be unable to kill the large sprouts, or the whole tree, I should say. And again, if you want to use prescribed fire, please find a professional to do it. It's not something you should be, doing by yourself. It's been a dry year. We don't need any wildfires down here, so keep that in mind. And again, like buckthorn, Siberian elm management, it's a long-term deal. It's not something, it's not going to disappear in 1 or 2 years. You might have it totally under control, but then because of, its high seed germination, high seed production, you might have it again in a few years. So constant vigilance, and hopefully you'll be able to keep it under control and in check. Moving on, prickly ash. So it's a shrub / small tree. It's not technically an invasive species, but because it is native to Minnesota, but it's kind of a nasty plant. I personally find it very aggravating because it really ruins your woods experience. It's typically found in, open woods, clearings or forest understories. And an easy way to identify it is to look for the compound leaves and the large thorns, which can be found on all aged plants. So what I'm talking about when I say compound leaf is this right here. This entire structure is one single leaf, and then each one of these smaller ones is called a leaflet. So you're going to find the thorns all along your main stem here, and there will be no thorns up here. So if you think you have it, look for the thorns in here, and these compound leaflets make it pretty easy to identify. Prickly ash, because it's native, it's not quite as invasive as buckthorn, but because of those thorns, it makes it really uncomfortable to walk through. And as I kind of said before, it just totally ruins your woods experience. So this isn't a species that you need to go and remove every single one from your land or your property. However, it is a species that you are going to want to control around your paths or your trails or places that people are going to walk on a regular basis. Just so, you're not getting your clothes snagged. You're not, getting all frustrated when you have, thorns in your legs. So it's totally native to Minnesota. It's totally okay to have on the landscape. It's not going to take over your woods. It's not going to choke everything else out, like buckthorn and Siberian elm are. But it's one of these things you want to keep an eye on just so you can continue to enjoy the woods and, get the most out of it, get the most out of your property. So to control prickly ash, we use, the same stump cut treatment that we use for Siberian elm and buckthorn. Cut the stump, put the treatment on the stump, and carry on. So I chose one more Minnesota native, and that's poison ivy. Again, technically not an invasive, but I think we all are familiar with what poison ivy does to us. So I figure we better lump it in, and we'll get the biggest bang for our buck here and get all the problem plants. So You probably know the saying, leaves of three, let them be, leaves of five, stay alive. So this is a very good saying to live by when you're in the woods. And as you can kind of see in these pictures, poison ivy and Virginia creeper look pretty similar until you start counting the leaves. So that Virginia creeper has 5 leaves, whereas the poison ivy only has 3. Virginia creeper will not, cause the same itching and burning sensation, that poison ivy does. So another thing to look for when you're looking at poison ivy is that the leaves are typically shiny. Um, what that shininess is it's plant's oil. So when you have a reaction on your skin to poison ivy, what's happening is the oil is causing, this um, reaction on your skin, and that's what's actually doing it. Um, it's not like other plants where there's hairs or whatnot. It's the oil on the plant that then reacts with your skin. So if you do think you've run into some poison ivy, warm water and soap or cold water. Don't use hot water because that will open up the pores on your skin and actually make it more likely that you get the poison ivy. But also, if you're walking through the woods, you might get poison ivy oils on your clothes, on your pants, on your shoes. So kind of just a good practice. If you've been out and about, you think you might have walked through some poison ivy. When you take your boots off, when you take your shoes off, your pants off, whatever, wash your hands and, pants particularly, either, put them in the laundry machine right away, or, if you put them in the hamper, whoever does laundry, make sure they're aware to, wash your hands after you put the load in the washer. So bear that in mind, because poison ivy is extremely common throughout the county, and it can be found in both, woodlands and prairie savanna habitats. So personally, I see it a lot in road ditches, along fences, stream banks, and, just really any non-cultivated habitat. Poison ivy control can be a bit more difficult because it is a native plant. So the way to control it typically involves harming some kind of native vegetation, whether we want to or not. But before we talk about control, let's again talk about the dangers of it. If you touch any leaves, stems, or berries, you can get that oil on you. Again, it's going to cause those severe blisters, rashes, swelling, and again, it can be spread through contact with just the plant oil. You do not have to directly touch the plant. So if your pet has been running through poison ivy and you pet your pet, you will begin to have a reaction if you don't take care of that. So know that if your dog's running through the woods and there's poison ivy out and about, it might be a good idea to give them a little bath so that you're not getting poison ivy when you're just walking around your house later. So back to control. Because of what we just discussed, all these reasons that poison ivy is harmful, hand pulling, not exactly recommended. Mowing can be done. It can be used to kind of decrease the population. It's not going to completely eradicate poison ivy from your landscape. And, when you're doing this repeated mowing, it's also removing any native species. So a bit of a catch-22 there, but if you're just looking to knock the population back a little bit, mowing's a great option. Also, if you're mowing, be sure to rinse your mowing equipment so you're not playing with your blade, trying to tighten something underneath, and then you get poison ivy all over your hands because it's there. That oil will stick around like any oil, so be cognizant of that and you'll be fine. But if you decide not to mow it, you decide not to hand pull it, you can use herbicides. So there are a couple of poison ivy specific chemicals out there, or there are just some broadleaf killers such as 2,4-D or choose your favorite broadleaf killer. With these broadleaf killers, they will kill the poison ivy, but they will also kill any other broadleaf plants. So again, if we're spraying broadleaf killer, we want to do a very good job of just targeting the poison ivy, just targeting what we want to kill. So if you're worried about your grass is not considered a broadleaf plant, so you don't need to worry about it. 2,4-D is a chemical that people will use in their lawns to kill dandelion and whatnot, and it's going to have the same effect on poison ivy. So if you don't like any of those options, your last option is goats and sheep. These goats and sheep have to be specifically trained to feed on poison ivy, and I'm not 100% sure whether we have goats or sheep like that here in the Sherburne County area. That would be something that would take a little bit further research. But this option is typically reserved for forested areas where we can't get equipment in, or on steep slopes, and it's on areas that have a very heavy population. So goats and sheep will eat the poison ivy. However, they will also eat all of the native vegetation. So typically we will keep them fenced in a very small area, and we're targeting the poison ivy and not all of the vegetation. So very specific for very heavy infestations. And finally, as a safety caveat, never burn poison ivy to get rid of it. Throw it in the trash, throw it somewhere else, but do not burn it. It's going to release those same harmful chemicals that are, the same chemicals that are harmful to your skin, and then you're going to breathe them in, and it causes all kinds of respiratory problems. So moving forward, wild parsnip. So right now is a really great time to go out and start identifying wild parsnip infestations, because they are in bloom or very much so about to be in bloom. So typically we define this in disturbed areas and along the edges of habitat. So it likes full sun, it can invade degraded prairies, but most commonly I will see it in road ditches and along fence rows in agricultural fields. So if you're out and about and you're driving on the highway and it's July and you see yellow flowers in the median, it's more than likely wild parsnip. And kind of the reason for that is when they seed out is kind of the same time period that we're doing a lot of the mowing in our ditches, and a seed gets caught on a mower deck, the mower goes to the next stretch of highway, the seed falls off, and that's kind of the main way we see wild parsnip spreading in a road setting. But the reason we care about wild parsnip is kind of like the reason we care about poison ivy, because of those harmful impacts that it has on humans. So when you come into the contact with the juices of the plant, and then those juices on your skin become exposed to sunlight, it can cause really, really nasty, chemical burns and blistering. And if you've ever seen it, you do not want that to happen to you. So if you don't know what wild parsnip looks like, I would highly recommend learning or just avoiding yellow flowers in the month of July and early August, and especially on sunny days, because wild parsnip is photoreactive. So if you just get the juices on you and you cover it up, or it's a cloudy day, the chances of a reaction are astronomically lower than if you get the juices on you and it's a sunny day and the sun reacts with the juices in your skin and massive blisters form, and it's not a good time. So the yellow flowers, when you look at them kind of as a group here, you can see that they kind of have this, oh, my laser pointing my way, they kind of are flat on top, and that's kind of an easier way to identify versus more of a rounded shape. Now, again, this doesn't hold true across, all flowers, but if you're looking at yellow flower, has a flat top, it's roughly 4 to 5 feet tall, it's blooming in July, it's a pretty clear sign that it's wild parsnip. You typically won't find just one wild parsnip either. You'll typically find them in clumps. So you're kind of looking for all of those things to determine, is it wild parsnip? Because, if you look at the leaf, it has a pretty generic leaf. So it's not always the easiest to identify just by looking at the leaf. The yellow flower is pretty obvious once you know what to look for. So if you want to control wild parsnip, again, hand pulling, probably not your best idea. However, if you would like to hand pull it, I recommend a cloudy day, gloves, long sleeves, long pants, maybe some eye protection, but anything you can do to prevent those juices from, touching your skin. That's going to be your safest bet. But in my opinion, the best way you can control wild parsnip is with herbicides. So this kind of includes using some kind of glyphosate or, your favorite broadleaf killer, and then only spot spraying the wild parsnip plants. So this only spraying the wild parsnip plants, it will reduce the impact to your non-target species, because we do have some very beneficial species that like to live near, wild parsnip, and we also have some look-alike species to wild parsnip. So, for example, golden Alexander is very similar to wild parsnip. However, it only grows to 2 to 3 feet tall. It blooms in the spring, and it's just much smaller. So I get them mixed up in the spring, but once we get to July, it's very obvious being able to tell the difference between the two. So if you want to do wild parsnip management, feel free to wait till the middle of the summer. It's not like the buckthorn, like we were talking about earlier, where the best time to do it in the fall. The best time to do it is when it has these yellow, flowers, so you're able to kill it before it goes to seed, and thus, makes your problem even worse. Another similar species that people will get confused with wild parsnip is just goldenrod. We have a number of different kinds of goldenrods here in Minnesota that are all native. They're all great pollinators, but they have a slightly different flowered shape, and they're typically a little bit later of a bloomer into more of the late July, August time period. So now's a great time. So if you have wild parsnip and you have concerns about it, now's a great time to get out there and start working on it. Moving on to garlic mustard. Garlic mustard is an herbaceous weed that has a 2-year life cycle. So you can see in that picture, we have the germination to rosette, and then the bolting and flowering, and those happen in 2 separate growing seasons. So during the first year, it grows from a seed. It produces this small rosette, as you can see in that top picture. And that's kind of what it looks like, for the entire first growing season. However, in the second year, it will grow upwards. It produces a stem. It produces white flowers, and those white flowers will eventually turn into seeds. Each plant is actually able to produce hundreds of seeds, which is why it contributes to, it's such an invasive species, and it has such an ability to spread. So as you can see in the bottom picture, it creates these dense patches of only garlic mustard, which drastically reduces the biodiversity, and it displaces all of your native plants, your native flowers, your tree seedlings, and your grasses. So the best time to work on garlic mustard control is when it's in that first year rosette. So obviously it's a bit harder to spot at that stage. It's a lot less showy, but if you do notice it, that is your best time to control for it because it's not seeding yet. If you want to control your garlic mustard, a great way to start that is with hand pulling. Obviously, in large infestations like that bottom picture, hand pulling doesn't quite work, or it's going to take you forever and it's not worth your time. So bear that in mind. And you're going to, again, just like a dandelion, you have to remove the entire root system. But if you're working on removal of, your second year plants, hand pulling is still a great option. However, it's important to collect any plants that you do pull and, dispose of them and, either, burn them, put them in a garbage bag and tie the bag off, because they can actually still produce seeds even after you've pulled them from the ground. So if you just pull them and set them on the ground, you're not making a difference because it's still going to produce the seeds and you're still going to have the same problems, down the line. Your infestation is not going to go away. So the best way to dispose of them is to burn them. If you can't burn them, place them in a sealed garbage bag, for a while and just kind of let them sit. And if you are able to burn them, monitor your burn piles. Make sure that there's no new sprouts coming up and reseeding out all that hard work you just did. So, and also if you think, okay, I'm just going to put them in my compost pile, I would recommend against that, because sometimes compost piles can't get hot enough to actually kill the seed. And then you go to spread that compost and you're spreading invasive seeds. And again, all your hard work is going to go right down the drain. So burning's a great way, or, putting them in a garbage bag and throwing them in the trash. So the best thing you can do for controlling garlic mustard, is to prevent it from seeding. So cutting the flowers, removing seed pods on mature plants, those are both great options. However, you kind of have to do this on a regular basis. They're pretty quick plant. So even if you do cut the flowers or the seed pods off, they're going to regrow those pretty quickly. So it's something that you'll have to do on a regular basis. You can also use a weed torch to burn them and kill them at any stage. However, please check burning restrictions and don't use a weed torch, during dry periods, like right now. So you don't want to unintentionally create a fire. Herbicide is also an option that is effective at controlling garlic mustard. Again, you don't want to hurt any non-target species, so herbicide is probably a really good option for that bottom picture where there are no non-target species. Everything is garlic mustard, and you can take care of the problem hopefully at once, and then kind of restart things from there. So you would again use your glyphosate or Roundup type herbicide to kill the plants, and if you plan on using herbicide, just remember to spray only the garlic mustard again. Going on, emerald ash borer. I know I said I was only going to talk about plants, but this is something that's an invasive species. It's coming into our area. We're going to have to start dealing with it very soon. So when I say EAB, I am referring to emerald ash borer. So just keep that in mind. EAB is an invasive boring beetle that you can actually see in the top picture there. It's quite small, so spotting them on your tree or in the air is kind of next to impossible. The only way that the way that EAB kills your tree is actually the larvae. The larvae will feed and create these feeding galleries all throughout the live tissue of your tree, as you can see in this picture here. And what happens is they feed on all of the living tissue of the tree so that the tree is no longer able to send water up to the leaves and then nutrients down from the leaves to the roots. So once your EAB infestation has started, you can't bring anything back that's currently dead, because all of the living tissue is dead in that part of the tree. So EAB spends the majority of its life as a larvae underneath the bark of your tree, and it creates these tunneling feeding galleries, as you can see. They'll usually start in the top of the tree, work their way down towards the base of the tree, and that's kind of why you see the death from the top of the tree working its way down. So the easiest way to know that your tree may be infected with EAB is to look for flecking in the early spring before leaf out. And what I'm talking about flecking is this, where there's that light color on the trunk of the tree. Typically, because the infestation starts up higher, you will see it on the top of the tree, the part of the tree that's covered with leaves all summer. And that's why it's a great time to look in the spring. And that flecking is caused by woodpeckers seeking out the larvae underneath the bark. And this always doesn't happen immediately. Your tree may be infected with EAB for a year or two before you begin to see this flecking damage, because EAB does take 3 to 5 to 7 years to actually kill your ash tree. When we get the really cold winters, kind of similar to what we had this year, it is able to knock back the population. It's not able to completely kill all of the emerald ash borers, but there is some mortality because of that. So that's one thing that we have going for us in Minnesota that the states down south, they don't have. So one more point to Minnesota there. So you can have EAB present in your trees for a couple years before you begin to actually notice the damage or the flecking. So you might be saying like, well, if my tree can be infected without me even knowing it, how do I know, should I treat it? Should I cut it down? Well, according to the U of M, if your ash tree is within 15 miles of a known infestation, it is at high risk of being attacked by EAB. So there have currently been no positively identified emerald ash borer infestations here in Sherburne County yet. However, we are somewhat surrounded by it, and an infestation is somewhat inevitable. So the closest known infestations are in Anoka, Clearwater, and St. Cloud. So if you're within 15 miles of any of those and you have a high value ash tree, you might want to consider treatment or planting a new tree so you don't lose all your shade at once. And if you decide not to treat, definitely plant something new because that tree more than likely will not be here, in 10 years. Hopefully it's still here, but the reality of it is EAB is coming for us. It's more than likely here. We just haven't positively identified it yet. For what it's worth, the city of Elk River, they have begun their, emerald ash borer management plan, a couple years ago, which included removing all of their low value ash trees and then keeping their high value ash trees. And I think 2019 was the first year that they began their treatments. And these treatments include, root injections, as you can see in this picture. They're injecting chemicals into the root flares of the tree, and then the tree will pull all the pesticides throughout the tree. So if you do get an emerald ash borer, inject its larvae in, it will kill the larvae before the larvae can damage the tree. And these injections will give the tree protection for 2 to 3 years. It used to just be 2 years. Now they're saying 2 to 3. So hopefully in another 5 years, they're going to be saying 3 to 4. That's kind of the hope. So if you do the math, and with 2 years treatment plan on a 14-inch diameter tree, it's cheaper to give this tree yearly, or give this tree a treatment every 2 years for the next 30 years than it is to cut the tree down. So 30 years is about your break-even point for whether should I cut this tree or should I treat this tree. So if you think that tree is going to be sticking around for at least another 30 years, you're probably better off using the injection and treating the tree and keeping it healthy for the long term. Again, if you wait to treat and you start losing branches at the top, the treatment will not be able to bring back those dead branches. So you're here. The most important part is to treat early before you have an issue, and then to prune out damaged branches, just so the tree continues to look good and maintain its health. I would recommend having a professional do any sort of injection or treatment because this treatment does include drilling into the wood, and if your drill's not sharp enough or you do it wrong, you can actually cauterize this wound that you're creating on the tree. Then you go to inject your chemicals, and all of the cells are burnt shut, so they're not able to absorb any of that chemical. So you damaged the tree, you wasted your time, and you more than likely wasted the chemical because it wasn't able to be absorbed by the tree. So definitely have a professional do it the first time. If you feel like you can do it yourself afterwards, go for it. But personally, I would always pay someone to do it for me so I know it's done right. Another management strategy that's being used by the government to work on EAB as a whole, as a country, is the use of parasitic wasps. So what we would refer to as biocontrol. So these parasitic wasps are coming from the Far East, where emerald ash borer is native. So Russia, China, countries over there. And what they're able to do is these wasps are able to land on the bark, and they can sense with their feet the vibrations underneath. And then they're able to use their ovipositor, or what we would think of as their stinger, to inject wasp larvae into the larvae of the emerald ash borer, thus killing the emerald ash borer. It's really fascinating. More than happy to talk about that more later, but we won't include it here. But the biocontrol is a great option for slowing down the spread, decreasing the population as a whole. And again, wasp, is kind of a scary word sometimes, but these are not, like your yellow jackets or your hornets. These are a lot smaller. They don't sting human beings. They look kind of freaky, I won't lie, but they pose no risk to humans. So with that, that's the last thing I'm going to cover tonight. So if you have any questions about terrestrials, anything we covered tonight, feel free to drop a comment in or unmute yourself and we can chat about it. If you have questions about aquatic invasive species, there's Dan's information. Otherwise, have a good night.